Hi, I'm Pam Lathrop.
And I'm Beth Jacobson.
Welcome to the January edition of the Beloit Today Show.
Happy New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year to you. Woohoo.
We're not matching. We're not matching today. We matched.
How can we function? I don't know. Today our show is going to focus on emergency management. So we have a lot of information to give to people. It's an interesting topic, so don't turn your TVs off.
Yeah, it's very serious. So we're gonna hopefully our next show will be a little lighter, but it's an important subject for the city and for our residents.
We just wanted people to know how all the departments function together, all the different roles that people play. Some of the roles will probably be sort of surprising to people because they might think that emergency management just functions or focuses on the police and fire departments. So we do have a team of employees who gather when a critical incident occurs, right?
Right. When an emergency is declared, the team, depending on the emergency, comes together. We meet in the Emergency Operations Center, which we refer to as the EOC, and that's where all the radios are going off and phones and computers, and that's where we really manage the scene.
Well, who declares when an incident is worthy of this emergency management team gathering?
Sure. Well, typically what will happen is sometimes you can prepare for them and sometimes you can't. If it's weather related, you kind of can anticipate a little bit, but essentially the city manager will declare it, and the city council, I think it's within 48 hours, will concur with him, and that what happens is that initiates some other processes that come into place during emergency. We can purchase things on an emergency basis, and it kind of streamlines the way that we do business.
Well, who's on the team that assembles then?
The team that assembles, it's focused on, depends on sort of what the emergency is, but typically it's the directors and division heads of police, fire, public works. There's definitely some support staff members that help us with logistics, and we also, some roles change depending on the emergency, and for instance, my role doesn't change. I always do public information. I'm not well versed in police, fire, and public works.
Well, it sounds like everybody there has a specific role.
Yeah, there's specific roles in place, and we do a lot of training. We've been through a lot of classes, and the roles that other departments do outside of my role is really they do a lot of training and they learn the specific functions of these different roles. So the training for me isn't always that exciting, but it's important, and so we do expect our employees to go through that so that in an emergency we're not struggling to communicate. We're actually focusing on the disaster.
And actually the training that people attend is out in Emmitsburg, Maryland, right? And people from all over the nation attend this training.
Yes, some of the training's in Emmitsburg, some of it's locally. I went out to Emmitsburg and it was very eye-opening, and they set it up so that each person has specific roles so that you're kind of your own emergency management team. It was very interesting, and they reimburse the city for it, so it's free to our taxpayers.
Well, today we're going to talk with several members of the city's emergency management team and learn how people work together, the various departments work together. I know it's winter, so we might be focusing a little bit on snow especially, but there are plenty of other critical incidents that the city deals with. So let's see how people deal with all these incidents.
Yes, let's learn. Hi, I'm here. We're in the studio today talking about emergency management, and I have some of my friends from the city here with me today. I guess your left is Chris Walsh. She's the Director of Operations and Public Works, and I have Bruce Zagloski, and he's the Public Works Supervisor in Public Works. And we have Chief Brad Liggett, and he is our Fire Chief. And we meet regularly when we talk about emergency management, and today we want to talk about just kind of let the city know how we go about doing handling an emergency and preparing for it. It's kind of a big role at the city, and I think sometimes people don't know about it until it's sort of in a dire strait. So let's talk about some traditional roles. I think today we're really interested in highlighting Public Works because people traditionally don't know that Public Works handles a lot of our emergencies. Would you say that's correct, Chief?
Absolutely. I think one of the set of unsung heroes in emergency response is the Department of Public Works. They're not viewed as typically as first responders, but their role is absolutely integral to the survival of a city in the event of a disaster. And many emergencies that we endure in a year's time, snow emergencies, storm emergencies, weather-related events, DPW is the primary responder for those events.
And is that what the experience you guys have had?
Absolutely. Actually, Public Works is integral, just like Brad said, to being part of the team. You know, the team representing probably 5 different disciplines, and Public Works is one of those members. And again, since we're in the winter season, snow, but last summer it was the flood that we had, and or not the flood, the windstorm. Before that, the flood. So we kind of just go from one to the next, but I think important to the regular average Joe on the street is to realize that emergency management is a 24/7 job that we all take seriously. And
I think it's also important that we mention that we have support staff that helps us as well. You know, I'm certainly not in the field, but there's people that are behind the scenes that try to help us maintain communication during the event. So today we're going to talk about, there's 5 steps of emergency management, and we're going to try to hit them all. We're going to kind of blend 2 of them together. So first we're going to talk about mitigation, then we'll talk about prevention and preparedness, and then we'll move on to response and then recovery. So let's talk about mitigation first. And some people look at mitigation as after the disaster, having it not happen again. But really, it should be the first step. Is that correct?
It's actually the front end of emergency management, and mitigation is doing activities that would sustain life and infrastructure. So Public Works, that's probably our most important role, our central role, because of critical infrastructure. And by that, I mean the roads, bridges, wastewater, water plants, fuel station that we have, those critical things that help a city be able to sustain.
Now,
But
could you guys give us some examples of what you do to mitigate disasters in the city?
Well, mitigation comes in many different forms. The first part of a mitigation strategy is to identify the hazards and the threats to the community. So every year, Rock County Emergency Management partners with the City of Beloit to reevaluate the hazards that exist here. For instance, we are subject to floods, fire, tornadoes, thunderstorms, earthquakes, those types of emergencies. Also hazardous material spills from industry and transportation. We identify all of those hazards and then put together plans on how we would deal with those. Part of that mitigation strategy is to look at how we can reduce those hazards in the community. For instance, Department of Public Works is integral to preventing flood damage by making sure that our shores along the river and creek beds are properly maintained, and so that water doesn't come over the banks. If we were lived in a very low-lying area, we would also have diking systems and things like that in place to reduce the amount of damage that would occur if a flood did occur. In the fire service, we look at fire inspection programs and also fire codes to help reduce the impact of an emergency if an emergency occurs. So fire sprinklers, having smoke detectors, those are all mitigation strategies to help us deal with disasters. In the wildlife setting, having brush and things up against your home can increase the chance of your home burning as a result of a wildfire. Making sure that you have a good communication plan with your family. Those are all things that you can use to mitigate an emergency and reduce the effect of emergency when that occurs.
And I think something that I think we all can agree on is that education is also important, so that people know how to identify what is a potential risk and then how to alleviate that risk.
Right, and you know, from the president down, the concept is whole communities. So families, you would mitigate by having your preparedness plan. I mean, you would have your medication you know, your backlog of medication, flashlight batteries, radios, things that you need to sustain your family. You would have discussion about that and what are your vulnerabilities. If you had a pet.
Well, that's a great segue, because I think next we should talk about prevention and preparedness. So how does the city prepare and focus on preventing emergencies?
Well, all of our members at Public Works, every employee is trained on the National Incident Management System, which actually gets everybody to speak on the same language. We can speak with fire, we can speak with police, and everybody understands their role. Everybody's speaking the same jargon, so there's no confusion. So everyone knows exactly on how to deal with an emergency. So when they go in, they know what the end goal is, and we can all work together safely. One of the other preparedness things that we do is we have a mutual aid agreement with 12 other communities, local, and we also have a statewide mutual aid agreement. So in case of a disaster, we can call for help for as far away as, you know, Ashland if need be. If they have a piece of equipment, they can come down and assist us.
Now, how does the city, you know, we talk about being prepared, but how do we know, how do we tell the citizens that we're prepared for really any disaster? I know that when we handle a disaster, whether it's a storm, whether it's a natural disaster, it could be really potentially anything, but how do we start that process, and how do we know to come together and speak the same language? I've been through some of the NIMS training, I don't remember what it stands for.
National Incident
Management System. And it really is everyone knowing what their role is. So you sit down at a table and say, this is your role, you should know what it entails.
Exactly.
So can you talk about the training that we do internally?
Well, we have a number of staff that are trained in different areas. If it would be for damage assessment. So if a disaster does come, like our storm that we had, they could do damage assessment. The supervisors are trained what to look for if we need to declare it an emergency, as in what criteria is needed to do that. And I guess for preparedness, like on the snow aspect, and we prepare for that year round. We work at different concepts of snow removal 11 months of the year. We have 1 month off that we don't actually work on snow. But we have different things for our equipment that we go through. We check the roads constantly for hazards that may be, for plows. The guys we go through for so they can inform their family, so they're prepared. If they're staying at work for a number of days, what their families have to do, what do they have to have on hand, so they can sustain their end. The driver doesn't have to worry about, when he's out plowing, is his family okay?
And we're talking about doing a tabletop. Can you talk about a tabletop exercise and what that means?
Well, there's several different types of exercises that the city participates in when we are going through our preparedness part of our plan. And that's a key element to the success of a plan, because we exercise the plan and find out if there are any inadequacies, if there's any communication gaps, if there's any accountability gaps in the plan. The way this works, we always start out with a tabletop exercise where all of the different disciplines that would respond to an emergency come together, and we practice through a slideshow. It's not time perfect. It's based on theory and how we would respond, and we test the plan from that perspective. We go around the table, and each discipline has the opportunity to speak about how they would respond to a particular emergency, and then also how we would react with other partners during that time frame. It gives us an idea and a rough estimate of how things would play out, and then it helps us identify those gaps. Then there's a functional exercise. A functional exercise is the middle of the road type of exercise where different disciplines practice all of the different things that they do within their discipline only. Sometimes functional exercises can occur in conjunction with other disciplines, but most of the time those are just the discipline-specific trainings. For instance, how a DPW might deal with their snow routes and timing and scheduling. They might test those things. The fire department, we might test how we would deal with a mass casualty incident. The police department, how they might deal with a school shooting. And then the full-scale exercise are where all the partners come together. Emergency management, Red Cross, DPW, fire department, police department. We all come together in a full-scale exercise where we have moulage patients, debris to deal with, a collapsed building, a large fire, a snow emergency, an ice storm, where we simulate all of the things that happen during those time frames and then test our ability to deal with those.
So now that we've covered preparing for an emergency and preventing an emergency, let's talk about when it actually happens. Let's talk about first responders. What happens first, and what does the city focus on when there's been a disaster?
Well, clearly, when the very first response that goes out to the community is to protect people, property, and the environment. And all of the team gets together. We all have roles within that initial response. So if we know about the disasters, such as a snowstorm, we should be getting together ahead of time and talking through our roles. There are actually 5 different disciplines that are responsible for emergency management, and the 5 are public works, police, fire, emergency medical services, and health. So those are the 5 that residents should be able to count on. And then again, depending on the initial response, who is first on the scene, or if it's a snowstorm, we know it's coming, then public works tag, we're it. You know, we need to step up and play with the other first responders, and the other first responders at that point in time support our functions.
So what typically happens in our office is that if it's a snowstorm, for instance, we're prepared for it. But other times we just, on a regular workday, we'll get a phone call in the manager's office and say, Larry, we've got a problem. And so that's what kind of initiates this emergency declaration. So the city manager declares an emergency, and then he will open the Emergency Operations Center. Can one of you talk about where we meet as a group and the function of, it's called the EOC?
Sure. The Emergency Operations Center is designed to be a coordination point for all the services that are offered to the community during a disaster or snowstorm event. Our Emergency Operations Center is opened at different levels of activation based on the severity of the incident. It may be an area command post, it may be a unified command post, or it could be a full-scale Emergency Operations Center activation. We have 2 locations in the city. The primary location is the Beloit Police Department. The secondary location is the Beloit Fire Department. The Emergency Operations Center is designed to have communication capabilities amongst all of the discipline, and then designed to bring all of our partners together, liaisons from all of the different partnerships, to a central location so that we can coordinate our response to an emergency. Now, the idea is that not any one discipline is completely in command. What we do is we practice a concept called unified command, in which each of the disciplines has a representative at the table, and we work collaboratively to solve the problem. And that's what this segment is really about, is the fact that we work very diligently to bring those partnerships together on a monthly basis through planning, heightened awareness, evaluations, and threat evaluations. And we work very collaboratively with the Department of Public Works to make that happen.
And in the EOC, it's staff members, and it's kind of crazy, and there's radios and phones and computers. But who else is at the table other than city employees?
Well, actually, besides city employees, we will have the county emergency manager. You may have state representatives that come down if Beloit experiences a tornado. We're going to have help from other communities as well, and they might be at the table. Volunteer organizations, Red Cross. If it's a snow event, we might request the Snowmobiler Association, one person to be in the EOC with us. Absolutely your power companies. Locally, it's Alliant and Rock County Electric. You're going to request outside vendors, perhaps. Perhaps we are in need of materials, products, or we need a helicopter. we're going to request our businesses to play with us in the EOC.
And so the way that the EOC works for our residents to know is that, we're really pulling in a team of people that can handle whatever that situation is the best. So we're not insular and where we're just maintaining our staff. We're actually asking for help and saying, how can we address this and keep our city safe?
Correct.
And so when that happens, it's declared, there's lots of stuff going on. When do we decide that it's dwindled down or it's appropriate to work on recovery and sort of kind of shift back to a little bit of normal working? How does that happen?
Actually, that's called recovery. And it would be when the initial crisis is over. However, I would say that many times, and I think everyone here agrees, many times we're in recovery while at the same time we're responding. So it could be a dual function for us. For some of the disciplines, maybe not all of them, but when you get in recovery, that's when we're trying to put the community back to normalcy, and we're doing those types of functions.
So recovery really, when the incident happens and we're focusing on recovery, there's another step I want to mention is that depending on the emergency and depending on the damage to our infrastructure, the city may be eligible for reimbursement from this federal government.
Correct.
And so I think it's important for our residents to know that during recovery, we're also trying to document what's happening. And I know, Bruce, that's a real struggle when you send your crews out to say, get rid of those trees, chip the trees, get rid of it, but also document it. How do we balance recovery and also documenting the damage?
Well, we normally will try to send somebody along with the crews that are out removing the debris, and then they will document it. And one of the other critical parts of the whole incident, or the incident, is the incident command like we would have at Public Works during the storm that came through for the trees. They can gather some of the information and then they can pass it on to the EOC, so that way they can get a better picture of what's happening and they can get a dollar amount, hopefully, and decide if it meets the criteria to be a national or a disaster, deemed a disaster.
So I think it's important for our residents to know that there's many different things, public safety and public works, they're in the field, and then there's people like me in the EOC saying, wait a minute, how much are we spending? What are we doing to document this? And really that's a way to protect our taxpayers and our money, to make sure that the money we spend is really for our city, and when there's an emergency we might need help. Is that a fair?
I think that wraps it up.
So as far as recovery, anyone can, any department can help do that.
Absolutely.
But we eat those costs initially.
Initially, we are going to eat those costs. However, there is a federal and or state cost share that will go with that. So the bulk of any federal declaration, the federal government is paying for. The last storm that we had in July, it was a state declaration. It was not a federal declaration. So it behooves every community to look at all avenues. And I really need to say, in the recovery phase, I think Public Works needs to look at fire, look at police as your partner to help you, because otherwise you will burn out your staff. We don't have the depth to cover it, and there's nothing saying that I can't pick up the phone, call Brad, and say, we need someone in logistics. We need someone to come over here and document what's going on. And I think because we all play in the sandbox well together, that's what occurs, is that phone call can be made.
And just so people know, at the county level, they come in because they also help us with knowing what those resources are. The relationship between us and Rock County Emergency Management is to both make sure that the county is being addressed as a whole, but also to translate that to the state to say, we need help.
Correct, and then the state translates it to the federal government. The bottom line with every emergency is local is responsible for their community. It is not FEMA, it is not Homeland Security, it is local. Local taking care of local and then requesting aid right up the ladder.
Is there anything that any of you think that we should tell our residents about how to be prepared for an emergency in their, at the city, or what advice do you have for them if we are experiencing an emergency? What should they do? Who should they call?
Well, I guess I'll start it, and each one of us probably should say something. I think the number one thing is try to have your family as prepared as possible and realize we are not going to get there instantaneously. So in that regard, in the last storm that we had, I give major kudos to the citizens of Beloit. They were very patient and very thankful for what the crews were doing. I think those are the two things: be prepared, be patient, and be ready. Be ready before the event occurs. Bruce?
And I guess for the snow aspect, like she says, get everything prepared so you can be at home, not be out on the road. We're trying to get the roads done as quickly as possible. It generally takes the guys 16 hours out there plowing. That's a long time, and going around cars all the time, people parking on the street, it becomes very difficult. And it's just very tough on the guys. So if we can make it a little bit easier on them and not be at risk, we don't want to be pushing people out of the ditches. We just don't like to do it. We don't have the time to do it. That's the thing, because we need to get all the streets cleared so everybody can get wherever they need to go safely.
I think probably one of the most important things that citizens can do to deal with these types of emergencies is personal preparedness. There are only about 170 emergency responders in the city of Beloit between DPW, police, and fire. There are 35,000 residents. And we need to keep in mind that we cannot handle all of the emergencies that occur in these disasters. So personal preparedness is extremely important. Having first aid kits. Go to ready.gov. Look at the American Red Cross websites. Have communication plans in place. Have an emergency kit at home and in your car to help deal with emergencies when they do occur. Have a plan, a go bag that has temporary clothing, whether it's a couple sweatsuits and some underwear and some medication and first aid supplies that you can grab and go if you were forced to evacuate from the community. Little things like that can go a long way to sustaining yourself in an emergency. Probably the most important thing to understand is that in an emergency, a tornado, a federally declared disaster, whether it's a catastrophic event similar to Katrina or the storms that just occurred on the East Coast, it's very important to understand that you have to be able to sustain yourself for at least 5 days. And that's very important. That help may not be there for at least 5 days. So imagine and play these scenarios out in your own mind. What would you do if you didn't have power for 5 days? What would you do if you didn't have water and food for 5 days? So if you do those things and prepare ahead of time, make a big difference in how you survive a disaster.
Well, thank you guys for being here today. I think hopefully our residents have learned a lot. I think it's reassuring for them to know that the City of Beloit is prepared for any emergency that may happen. Police isn't here today, but they're certainly one of our partners. The table, we didn't have room at the table. So thank you guys for being here, and as always, I always appreciate working with you when there's an emergency, because you guys are making the tough decisions, and I'm just telling the press. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, next up on our show, I have two of my friends from Visit Beloit coming in, and they're going to talk about some upcoming events in Beloit in the months of January and February, so stay tuned.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, Ruth.
We're from Visit Beloit, and we wanted to tell you about all the fun things happening in Beloit this year in January and February. Winterfest is coming up January 25th through the 27th, and Beloit Parks and Recreation have put together lots of good fun things to do in Beloit.
They have family bingo, cross-country ski trails, but we have to make sure we have snow for that to work.
I'll take care of that.
Okay.
Okay.
Chills, Spills, and Thrills will be at Edwards Ice Arena, and they'll be accepting donations of canned goods for that. There will be a co-ed volleyball tournament, wintry fun at the Beloit Public Library, with games and Frosty the Snowman movie, horse-drawn sleigh rides at Big Hill Park, and that will be a free event, and snow golf. And there's also a euchre tournament, Ruth. I'm pretty good at euchre.
I am too. I love it.
I think we should take on Beth and Pam from the city in the
I
tournament.
think so
What do you
too.
think?
Let's team up.
All
You're
right,
on, girls.
sounds good.
All righty. The 8th Annual Beloit International Film Festival, better known as BIFF, is coming up February 14th through the 17th. 4 fun-filled days of great movies from all over the world, even more than 120 films. The honorary chairperson this year is David Zucker, who is a producer of Airplane, Naked Gun, Scary Movie, and many more that I'd like to see.
All right. Well, events include the sneak peek on January 29th, Launch and Laurels on February 14th, which would be a great way to spend Valentine's Day.
I'll tell my husband.
All right.
Okay.
BIFF Latino, student, kids, and family events. The Silent Film Showcase will be February 16th, featuring the Beloit Janesville Symphony. And did you know this year, before the Silent Film Showcase, they'll be having a silent auction fundraiser and a reception?
I didn't know that, but I'm glad to know it now because I heard that there was going to be a trip to Florida on that.
There's a lot of great prizes.
Okay, I'm sure it is, and it'll be a great time for everyone. And tickets for BIFF will be going on sale soon, and you can purchase them online or at the box office at 500 Public Avenue. Or for more information, details, and films on BIFF, you can visit the website at beloitfilmfest.org.
And there are also several other events happening. The Welty Center will be having full moon hikes on January 28th and February 25th.
Love full moon hikes. And don't forget the 8th Annual Martin Luther King Convocation at Eaton Chapel on January 21st. And Linda, for all the great things, fun things to do in Beloit, where do we want to go?
Visit Beloit.com, and don't forget to like us on Facebook and Pinterest.
I love Pinterest.
Pam, we have an emergency on our hands.
We do, right after the show.
We were just challenged to euchre.
Oh, I know. I know nothing about euchre. I'm not. Oh, I'm a really good euchre player. You guys, you better watch.
You better
out.
watch out.
So that wraps up another show. I think that was really informative and very interesting. I think the citizens of Beloit should be very comfortable in the fact that we have a great team assembled to handle emergencies.
Yes, they're great. I love working with them because I always feel like they're in control.
That's good. We like control.
So thank you for tuning in. Our next show, we're going to go back to our normal, breaking it up into different departments, and hopefully we won't have any emergencies other than these euchre tournaments we've challenged
Right.
to.
And please join us at some of the events coming up this month. Sounds exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.